Have you ever felt trapped by your own thoughts? Ever wondered why, despite all the external freedom you may have, your mind still feels like a prison? What if the real trap isn't outside of us, but within our own minds, locking us in a cycle of worry, fear, and doubt? You might have moments where you're stuck in overthinking, replaying the same thoughts over and over. Or maybe you've caught yourself chasing after things, thinking they will bring you happiness, only to realize that the joy fades away. Why does this happen? Why do we often find ourselves trapped by our own minds? And is there a way out? Imagine you're stuck in a room with all the doors locked. The key to escape is right in front of you, but you don't even see it. The trap is not the walls around you, but the blindfold covering your eyes. That blindfold is your unawareness, your inability to see things as they truly are. This video will help you remove that blindfold and escape the trap of your own mind. Welcome to Wisdom Woven, where we dive into transformative insights and powerful teachings to help you break free from mental prisons. In this video, we'll explore how Buddhist wisdom can guide you toward freedom by understanding the nature of your mind. You'll learn how to escape the traps we all face and how to live a life of peace, freedom, and clarity. Before we dive deeper, I want to remind you that there are so many views on this channel, but only 0.2% subscribe. So, if you're finding this content helpful, please like, comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more valuable insights. It's free, and it helps support our work. Let's dive into this journey of self-liberation together. The mind can be a great ally or a fierce enemy. It all depends on how we relate to it. In Buddhism, the mind is seen as the source of both our suffering and our freedom. When we understand its true nature, we can begin to transcend its traps. Let's explore this powerful concept that could change everything. Understanding the nature of the mind, friend or foe, the mind is like a vast ocean. At times, it is calm and peaceful, reflecting the world around it in clarity. At other times, it is turbulent and stormy, making everything unclear. This is how our minds operate, shifting from peace to chaos, from clarity to confusion, often without us even knowing why. The first step to escaping the trap of your own mind is to understand what the mind truly is. Is it your friend, or is it your foe? In Buddhism, we are taught that the mind is neither inherently good nor bad. It is a tool, like a sword, that can be used for either destruction or protection. It all depends on how we wield it. Just like a sword, if we use the mind carelessly, it can cut us and others. But if we learn to wield it with wisdom, it becomes a tool for enlightenment and freedom. Let's think about it this way. Imagine your mind is like a garden. In this garden, there are weeds. These weeds represent negative thoughts, attachments, and harmful emotions. If you don't tend to the garden, the weeds will overtake it, choking out any chance for flowers or peace. But if you pay attention and carefully remove the weeds, your garden can bloom beautifully. The same applies to your mind. If left unchecked, the weeds of negative thoughts and emotions will dominate your mental landscape. But with practice, mindfulness, and awareness, you can cultivate a peaceful, fertile mind. This idea of the mind being a garden can help you realize that the mind is not a permanent force of nature. It's not something that is unchangeable. It's fluid. Our thoughts, feelings, and reactions change all the time. And if you pay attention, you will see that the nature of the mind is constantly shifting between peace and turmoil, between clarity and confusion. The key is understanding that your mind is not fixed. It's a dynamic force that you have the power to shape and direct. But how do you shape your mind? How do you change it from a foe to a friend? This is where Buddhism offers profound insight. The first thing Buddhism teaches us about the mind is that it is influenced by everything. Your past, your experiences, your environment, and the people around you. These external factors shape the way your mind reacts to the world. For example, if you've been hurt by someone in the past, your mind may react with anger, fear, or suspicion when you encounter something that reminds you of that hurt. This reaction is not necessarily based on the present moment. It is based on your past experiences. The Buddha taught that most of our suffering arises from ignorance. This ignorance isn't about lacking knowledge, but about not understanding how our minds work. We often think that our thoughts, emotions, and reactions are simply who we are. We identify with them, believe them, and let them define us. But the truth is that these are just temporary states. The mind is not a permanent part of your identity. It is simply a collection of thoughts, feelings, and reactions that change all the time. One of the most profound lessons in Buddhism is that suffering comes from attachment. We attach to thoughts, we attach to emotions, and we attach to the idea that these are our true selves. For example, if you have a thought that says, "I am not good enough," and you attach to that thought, it becomes a part of your identity. You start to believe it, and it shapes how you see the world. Similarly, if you attach to a feeling of anger or sadness, you let that feeling define you. The more you attach, the stronger the grip those thoughts and feelings have over you. This is how the mind becomes a trap. But here's the thing: you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. These are simply experiences passing through your mind. The moment you begin to understand this, you start to realize that the mind is not an enemy to be defeated, but a tool to be mastered. It can be your greatest ally, helping you find clarity, peace, and freedom. But it requires effort, awareness, and the willingness to practice. The Buddha also taught that all things are impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. This includes your thoughts, emotions, and mental states. Your mind is constantly changing, just like the weather. One moment, you may feel calm, and the next, you may feel angry or sad. But just like the weather, these feelings are temporary. The key is not to attach to them or let them control you. When you begin to realize that your emotions and thoughts are not permanent, it becomes easier to detach from them and return to a state of peace. Another aspect of the mind that we must understand is its tendency to react. When something happens in the external world, your mind instantly reacts. This reaction is often automatic and unconscious. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, your mind might immediately react with anger. You may think, "How dare they?" and feel your blood pressure rise. But this reaction is not necessarily a reflection of reality. It's simply the mind's habitual response to the situation. If you can recognize this automatic reaction and pause, you can choose how to respond. You can choose to let go of the anger and return to a state of calm. This ability to pause and choose is one of the most powerful tools for transforming the mind. This brings us to the practice of mindfulness, which is central to Buddhist teachings. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully aware of what is happening in the present moment, without judgment. It's about observing your thoughts, feelings, and reactions as they arise, without getting caught up in them. When you are mindful, you are not at the mercy of your mind's automatic reactions. You are able to step back, observe, and choose how to respond. Mindfulness allows you to see your mind for what it truly is, an ever-changing collection of thoughts, feelings, and experiences. When you practice mindfulness, you begin to see that your mind is not a fixed entity, but a flow of energy that is constantly changing. This realization is key to breaking free from the trap of the mind. When you understand that your thoughts and emotions are not permanent, you stop clinging to them. You stop identifying with them, and in doing so, you free yourself from their grip. So, is your mind your friend or your foe? The answer is that it can be both. It depends on how you relate to it. If you allow your mind to control you, if you cling to your thoughts and emotions, it becomes your foe. But if you learn to observe your mind without attachment, without judgment, it becomes your greatest ally. You can learn to harness its power, to direct it toward peace, clarity, and wisdom. This is the path to liberation. Understanding the nature of the mind is the first step in breaking free from its traps. When you realize that the mind is not your enemy, but a tool that can be mastered, you begin to unlock the potential for true freedom. The mind is like a wild horse. It can be unruly and uncontrollable. But with practice, patience, and awareness, you can tame it. And in doing so, you set yourself free. This is the beginning of your journey. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the observer, the witness to it all. And once you realize this, you begin to escape the trap of your own mind. The origins of mental traps, conditioning, and karma. As we continue our journey toward mental freedom, it's essential to understand where these mental traps come from. Why do our minds seem to create problems where none exist? Why do we fall into negative thought patterns, habits, and beliefs that limit us? To answer these questions, we need to look deeper into the origins of our mental conditioning and the role of karma. Conditioning, the invisible hand shaping our mind. When we are born, our minds are like a blank canvas, clean, pure, and open. Over time, however, this canvas becomes filled with colors, strokes, and patterns from the world around us. These are the experiences, beliefs, and influences that shape our thinking, behaviors, and reactions. This process is known as conditioning. From the moment we are born, we are influenced by everything around us. Our family, society, culture, school, and even the media. These external influences tell us how to think, how to feel, and what is important in life. They teach us what to value and what to fear. Often, these lessons are not explicitly taught but absorbed passively, like a sponge soaking up water. For instance, you may have grown up hearing phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "You need to work hard to be successful." These messages might have instilled a belief that success is tied to effort and material wealth. While these beliefs may seem innocent or even helpful, they can also create mental traps. If you fail to meet these standards, you might feel inadequate, anxious, or frustrated. The mind, conditioned by such beliefs, constantly seeks success, wealth, and validation, but it often doesn't know how to handle failure or imperfection. But here's the catch. Much of what we believe and think is not even ours. It's been programmed into us. It's not the truth of who we are, but rather the result of years of conditioning. Recognizing this is the first step in freeing ourselves from the mental traps that hold us hostage. Karma, the seeds we plant. Another key aspect of understanding our mental traps is the concept of karma. In Buddhism, karma refers to the law of cause and effect, the idea that every action, thought, and intention we have creates an effect. Just as a seed grows into a plant, our actions and thoughts plant seeds in the garden of our mind, which eventually grow into our experiences. However, karma is not just about good or bad actions. It is about intention. For example, if you act out of fear or selfishness, the karmic result may be a sense of emptiness or dissatisfaction. On the other hand, if you act out of love, compassion, and wisdom, the results tend to be more peaceful and fulfilling. Every negative thought we have is like planting a seed of suffering. Every judgment, criticism, and attachment creates more mental clutter. Over time, these seeds take root and sprout into patterns of worry, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. We may not even be aware of it, but our actions, thoughts, and feelings are constantly shaping our minds and creating the conditions for future suffering or happiness. Karma, therefore, isn't just about what happens to us, it's about what we create. If we find ourselves trapped in negative patterns, it's not because of some external force, but because we have planted seeds of negativity in our minds. These seeds grow into the mental traps we struggle with today. The cycle of conditioning and karma. Now, imagine a cycle. Conditioning leads us to act in certain ways, and these actions create karma. This karma shapes our future actions, which in turn creates more karma. The cycle continues, each thought, word, and action reinforcing the next. The mental traps we experience are not random. They are the result of this ongoing cycle of conditioning and karma. For instance, someone who has been conditioned to believe that they must constantly prove themselves might act in ways that are driven by insecurity and fear of failure. These actions, born from fear, will likely lead to experiences of rejection or disappointment. The painful experiences reinforce the belief that they are not good enough, and the cycle continues. Breaking this cycle is not easy, but it is possible. It requires a deep understanding of how conditioning works and how karma operates. We must be willing to examine our thoughts, actions, and beliefs without judgment. Only then can we begin to undo the mental traps we've created and start planting seeds of wisdom, love, and freedom. The role of awareness in breaking the cycle. Awareness is the key to breaking free from the cycle of conditioning and karma. If we are unaware of the patterns that control our lives, we will continue to act out of habit, repeating the same mistakes over and over again. But when we bring awareness to our thoughts and actions, we can begin to see the patterns for what they are. This is where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in each moment, without judgment. It allows us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without becoming attached to them. By simply noticing when we are reacting out of old habits or conditioned responses, we can stop the cycle before it continues. For example, if you feel anger rising in response to a difficult situation, mindfulness allows you to notice that anger without becoming consumed by it. You can acknowledge it, but you don't have to act on it. This moment of awareness creates space between the stimulus, the situation, and the response, your emotional reaction. In that space, you have the freedom to choose a different response, one that is not dictated by conditioning or karma. Over time, mindfulness helps us recondition the mind. We can replace old, negative thought patterns with new, more constructive ones. As we plant seeds of awareness, compassion, and wisdom, the garden of our mind begins to change. The mental traps that once held us captive begin to dissolve, and in their place, we find peace and clarity, liberation through understanding. When we begin to understand the origins of our mental traps, we realize that they are not permanent. They are not fixed parts of who we are. They are simply the result of conditioning and karma. And just as they were created, they can also be undone. The Buddha taught that the path to liberation begins with understanding the nature of the mind. When we see how our thoughts and actions are shaped by conditioning and karma, we can begin to break free from the traps that bind us. We can start to make conscious choices, planting seeds of wisdom and compassion, in creating new patterns that lead to freedom. This understanding doesn't mean that we are free from difficulty or challenges. It simply means that we no longer have to be controlled by our conditioning and karma. We can face life with awareness, making choices that lead to greater peace and happiness. In the next part of this series, we will explore how mindfulness can help us break free from these mental traps and start the process of healing and transformation. But for now, take a moment to reflect on the origins of your own mental traps. What beliefs, fears, and patterns have been shaped by your past experiences? How might you begin to challenge them and plant new seeds in your mind? The power to change is within you. Breaking free, the art of mindful observation. Imagine, for a moment, you're standing by a river, watching the water flow past. The river keeps moving endlessly. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes it's wild, but it always flows forward. The water doesn't judge itself, it doesn't cling to any moment, it just flows. Now, think of your mind as this river. Thoughts come and go, just like the water. But what if, instead of being caught in the flow, you could stand on the bank, observing everything without being swept away? This is the essence of mindful observation. It's the practice of stepping back from your thoughts and simply witnessing them. In Buddhism, we often talk about the importance of watching the mind. It's like being a neutral observer of your own thoughts and feelings without getting lost in them. Sounds simple, right? But for most of us, it's a challenge. We're so used to getting caught up in our thoughts, reacting to them, believing them to be the absolute truth. But the truth is, thoughts are just thoughts. They don't define who we are. Let's break it down. Every day, we experience a constant stream of thoughts. Some are big, some are small, but they all come and go like waves in the ocean. Most of the time, we don't question them. We believe that the thoughts we have are who we are, that they're real, and that they deserve our attention. But think about this. If every thought you had was true, would you be able to keep up with them all? Would you have time for anything else? No. The truth is, our thoughts are just like clouds. They float by and vanish. We don't have to hold on to them. Mindfulness helps us create space between our thoughts and our actions. When we practice mindfulness, we train ourselves to stop reacting to every single thought that crosses our mind. Instead of jumping into a thought and believing it, we simply observe it. Here's a thought about fear. Okay, I see you, but you don't need my attention right now. Or, there's a thought about anger. Interesting, but I don't have to act on it. This space between thought and reaction is where our freedom lies. Think of the mind like a crowded room. When we're caught in the flow of thoughts, we're like someone trapped in that room, overwhelmed by the noise and chaos. But mindfulness gives us the ability to step outside of that room, to take a few steps back, and just watch what's going on in there without being affected. We don't need to control or change anything. We simply need to observe. In Buddhism, the practice of mindful observation is also tied to the idea of impermanence. The understanding that everything in life is constantly changing. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, situations shift. When we observe this with mindfulness, we see that nothing lasts forever. This helps us let go of attachments to certain thoughts or feelings. We stop clinging to them, believing they are permanent or unchangeable. We start to realize that we are not our thoughts, and our thoughts don't have control over us. Now, you might be wondering, how do I practice this mindful observation? It's simple, but it takes time and patience. Start by finding a quiet place and sitting comfortably. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and begin to observe your thoughts. Don't try to control them, push them away, or hold on to any of them. Just notice them. You might think, oh, there's a thought about work. There's a thought about dinner. There's a thought about my past. Just notice them and let them float by, like leaves in the wind. As you continue this practice, you'll start to notice patterns. You'll see how some thoughts tend to repeat themselves. You'll notice how certain emotions trigger specific thoughts. But the key here is not to judge yourself for having these thoughts or emotions. They are simply part of being human. The goal is to become the observer, not the participant. You'll begin to realize that you have the power to choose how you respond to your thoughts, rather than reacting automatically. This is where true freedom begins. The more we practice mindful observation, the less power our thoughts have over us. We stop being dragged around by our emotions and mental habits. We stop identifying with every passing thought and start to see them for what they are: temporary, fleeting, and often not as important as we once thought. Mindful observation is also deeply connected to the Buddhist concept of non-attachment. We often get trapped by our desires, wants, and fears. But when we observe these emotions without attachment, we start to see them in their proper perspective. They don't need to control us. We can let them come and go, without getting tangled up in them. In a way, this is a form of freedom, not just from our thoughts, but from our need to control everything in our lives. But it's important to understand that this isn't something you'll achieve overnight. Mindful observation takes practice. It's a skill, and like any skill, it improves with time. At first, you might find your mind racing, your thoughts jumping from one thing to another. That's okay. Don't judge yourself for it. The fact that you're aware of it is already a step forward. Each time you come back to the present moment, each time you observe a thought without reacting to it, you're strengthening your ability to stay centered and calm. Over time, this practice will begin to seep into your daily life. You'll find that you react less impulsively. You'll feel more at peace with your thoughts and emotions. You'll begin to understand that you don't need to control everything. You don't need to chase after every thought or try to fix everything in your life. The more you practice mindful observation, the more you'll experience the freedom that comes with it. Remember, the mind can be both your greatest ally and your greatest challenge. By learning to observe your thoughts, you start to untangle the knots that keep you stuck. You stop identifying with your thoughts and emotions and start to see them as passing phenomena. You begin to realize that true freedom lies not in the absence of thoughts, but in the ability to watch them without getting caught up in them. As you continue this practice, you'll start to experience more peace, more clarity, and more joy. You'll begin to see life as it is, impermanent, fluid, and constantly changing. And you'll learn to flow with it, just like that river. The mind no longer has to be a source of suffering. It can become a source of freedom, as you learn to watch it with wisdom, patience, and compassion. In the end, breaking free from the trap of your own mind isn't about stopping the flow of thoughts or trying to change everything. It's about learning to be present with them, to observe them without judgment, and to allow them to pass without getting caught in their currents. This is the art of mindful observation, and with practice, it will set you free. The role of attachment, unveiling the chains. In Buddhism, one of the main causes of our suffering is attachment. You may have heard this word before, but what does it really mean? And how does it trap us? Let's begin with a simple question. What is it that you can't seem to let go of? Maybe it's an idea, a person, a possession, or even an expectation. You've probably noticed how strongly we hold on to things, sometimes without even realizing it. Attachments are like invisible chains that bind us, tying us to the past or to things that we believe we need to feel secure, happy, or worthy. But in reality, these attachments create more suffering than peace. Think about it. When we attach to something, we give it power over us. We start to identify ourselves with it. If it's a person, we might say, "Without them, I am nothing." If it's a possession, we might think, "If I lose this, I'll be incomplete." We end up believing that our happiness depends on these external things, and when they change or disappear, so does our happiness. This is the trap. The Buddha taught that everything in life is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. People come and go, possessions wear out, and circumstances constantly change. This truth can be unsettling at first, but it is also incredibly liberating. When we realize that everything is temporary, we can stop clinging to it in an attempt to make it permanent. And in letting go, we find peace. Consider the example of a child holding on to a toy. At first, the toy is everything to the child. If you try to take it away, the child cries in distress. But when the child matures and understands that there are other things in the world to enjoy, the toy loses its grip on their attention. Similarly, we must grow emotionally and mentally, realizing that what we attach ourselves to in the world doesn't define us. But how do we break free from attachments? The key is awareness. When we become aware of what we are clinging to and why, we begin to see the patterns of attachment in our minds. For example, ask yourself, why do I need this thing to feel good about myself? Why am I afraid of losing it? The more we ask ourselves these questions with honest curiosity, the more we begin to loosen the grip of attachment. It is important to recognize that attachment isn't the same as love or care. In fact, love without attachment is the purest form of love. When we love without clinging, we allow others to be free, and in turn, we experience a deeper connection with them. Attachment, on the other hand, is based on fear and control. We want to hold on to things or people because we fear losing them, and this fear creates suffering. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are there people, situations, or material things that you hold too tightly to? Do you find yourself in a constant struggle to keep things exactly as they are, out of fear of change? If you can, try to take a step back and observe how these attachments are affecting your life. Do they bring you lasting happiness, or are they simply temporary distractions? One powerful Buddhist practice to help with detachment is meditation. In meditation, we observe our thoughts without judgment or attachment. We learn to let thoughts come and go without holding on to them. This practice helps us see the nature of our attachments and how they come from our minds, not from the outside world. By sitting quietly and observing our thoughts, we can gain a deeper understanding of how attachment works and how to let go of it. Another important practice is mindfulness. Being mindful means being present in the moment without clinging to the past or worrying about the future. In each moment, we can ask ourselves, what is here right now? What am I holding on to? By bringing awareness to the present moment, we can free ourselves from the need to grasp onto things. It's also helpful to cultivate an attitude of non-attachment. This doesn't mean we stop caring about things, but we let go of the need for them to be a certain way. We accept that life is constantly changing, and we learn to embrace that change with an open heart. This doesn't mean we stop making efforts in life or stop taking care of what we value, but we do so with the understanding that nothing is permanent. For instance, if you're attached to a job or a career path, you might fear the day when it might end. However, if you can practice non-attachment, you can still work hard and strive to achieve your goals, but without the fear of losing it. You recognize that your worth is not tied to the job, and that if it ends, you will continue to find meaning and purpose in other aspects of life. This is the essence of freedom from attachment. You might be thinking, but how can I live without attachments? Doesn't this mean I have to give up everything I love? The answer is no. It's not about giving up love, joy, or meaningful connections. It's about releasing the fear of losing them. When we love without attachment, we don't depend on that person or thing to define our happiness. We can enjoy life fully without the constant anxiety of holding on to things that are beyond our control. Let's take another example. Imagine you're holding a delicate flower in your hands. If you clutch it too tightly, the flower will break. But if you hold it gently, it can remain whole and beautiful. Attachments are like that. The more tightly we grip, the more likely we are to cause harm, either to ourselves or to the things we hold on to. When we learn to hold things lightly and without fear, we allow them to exist freely. At the core of breaking free from attachment is the understanding that our true happiness comes from within, not from external sources. When we depend on external things for our sense of well-being, we are at the mercy of the world around us. But when we turn inward and cultivate peace, wisdom, and compassion, we create a solid foundation that is unshakable by external circumstances. So, how do we begin to untangle the web of attachment? Start small. Begin by observing your thoughts and feelings when you experience attachment. Notice the discomfort that arises when you face the possibility of loss. Allow yourself to feel that discomfort without reacting to it. Recognize that it is just a feeling, and it will pass. The more you practice, the easier it becomes to let go. Remember, the goal is not to live without care or love, but to live with a mind that is free from the chains of attachment. This freedom allows us to enjoy life with clarity, peace, and a deeper appreciation for the beauty of the present moment. In the end, it is the letting go of attachments that leads to the most profound freedom we can experience. The more we free ourselves from attachments, the more we allow ourselves to experience life as it truly is, without distortion. This is the path to inner peace and liberation. So, take a moment today to reflect on your attachments. Begin to notice where you might be holding on too tightly and gently start to let go. With each step, you will move closer to the freedom and joy that lies within you. Embracing impermanence, finding peace in change. In life, everything changes. The seasons shift, people come and go, emotions rise and fall, and the world around us is in a constant state of flux. But often, we try to resist this change. We hold on tightly to things, people, and even our own ideas, believing that if we can just keep things the same, we'll find peace and happiness. Yet, the truth is, resistance to change is one of the most powerful mental traps we can fall into. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence, or anicca, reminds us that nothing in this world is permanent. Everything is in a state of constant change. This includes not only the external world, but also our thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The mind is never static. The very nature of the mind is to be fluid, constantly moving like a river, and just like a river, it cannot stay in the same place forever. It will flow, shift, and change, whether we like it or not. But how often do we forget this truth? How many times have we found ourselves holding on to the past, regretting what we've lost, or fearing what the future might bring? How often do we get attached to the idea of permanence, imagining that happiness or peace is something that can be held on to, like a possession? Let me ask you something. When you look at your own life, can you see how much has changed over the years? Maybe you've gone through tough times, maybe you've experienced loss, or maybe you've even achieved things you once thought impossible. Each of these changes, whether joyful or painful, has shaped who you are today. The key to finding peace lies not in resisting change, but in accepting it, in learning to flow with it, like a leaf floating on a stream. You see, we can't control the river of life. We can't stop the flow of time, but what we can do is adjust our attitude toward it. Instead of fighting against the current, we can learn to move with it, to embrace the impermanence of life with open arms and an open heart. This is where true freedom lies, not in trying to hold on to things, but in understanding that everything is temporary, and in that very understanding, finding peace. This doesn't mean we should be indifferent or detached from life. On the contrary, it means that we can live more fully, knowing that everything is temporary and that we don't need to fear change. It means we can appreciate each moment, knowing it will never come again, and let go of the need to cling to the past or control the future. Life is not about holding on. It's about experiencing it fully, moment by moment. Consider this. When you're in the middle of a storm, it may seem like the world is falling apart. The winds are howling, the rain is pouring, and everything feels chaotic. But if you wait long enough, the storm will pass. The sun will shine again. This is a perfect metaphor for life. Every difficult moment, every hardship, is just a part of the storm. If we accept that it is temporary, we can find peace even in the middle of the storm. In Buddhism, we are taught that attachment is the root of suffering. When we hold on to things, whether it's a relationship, a job, a possession, or even our own beliefs and opinions, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Why? Because everything in life changes. Nothing stays the same. Holding on to things that are constantly changing only leads to frustration and suffering. It's like trying to grip sand in your hand. The tighter you hold on, the more it slips away. But when we learn to let go, to accept that everything is in a constant state of change, we free ourselves from the trap of attachment. We no longer have to worry about losing what we love, because we know that nothing lasts forever. Instead of fearing the end of something, we can celebrate its presence, appreciating it for as long as it lasts, knowing that it is a gift in the moment. This is not an easy practice. It's not easy to let go of things we love, or to accept the changes that come with life. But it is essential for our peace of mind. Think about it. How much of your suffering comes from resisting change? How many times have you felt anxious, upset, or frustrated because things didn't go as planned, or because something you loved slipped away from you? By embracing impermanence, we free ourselves from the need for control, and in doing so, we find a deeper sense of peace. We stop clinging to the past, stop fearing the future, and start living fully in the present. Life becomes more fluid, more natural, and less stressful. We begin to see that change is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It's through this acceptance that we can truly find freedom. Let's take a moment to reflect on how you can apply this teaching to your own life. Think about something you're holding on to right now. Maybe it's a past relationship, a regret, or even an expectation about the future. Now, try to see it with the eyes of impermanence. Notice how, just like everything else in life, it is temporary. It won't stay the same forever. And that's okay. What happens when you accept this? Do you feel a sense of relief, of lightness, of freedom? This is the power of embracing impermanence. It allows us to live fully, without fear, without clinging, without suffering. It helps us to flow with the river of life instead of fighting against it. In the Buddhist teachings, there is a beautiful metaphor of a flower that blooms and then withers. The beauty of the flower lies not in its permanence, but in its fleeting nature. When we learn to appreciate the impermanence of life, we begin to see the beauty in every moment, in every experience, no matter how short-lived it may be. So, the next time you find yourself resisting change, remember this: nothing stays the same. Life is fluid. Everything is temporary. By accepting this, you open yourself to a life of peace, freedom, and joy. Embrace impermanence, and you'll find that life becomes much easier to navigate, full of moments to cherish and opportunities to grow. Overcoming negative thoughts, the Buddhist approach. Our mind is a powerful thing. It can either be our greatest ally or our worst enemy. One of the biggest challenges we face in life is dealing with negative thoughts. We all have them. Thoughts of fear, doubt, anger, and resentment that seem to pop up out of nowhere. But what if I told you that these negative thoughts don't have to control us? What if you could learn to deal with them, transform them, and even overcome them? This is what Buddhist wisdom teaches us: how to break free from the grip of negative thinking and find peace of mind. Let's start by understanding where negative thoughts come from. In Buddhism, we believe that our thoughts are shaped by many factors: our past experiences, our conditioning, and our desires. Sometimes, we are unaware of how these influences shape our thinking. Our mind becomes like a mirror, reflecting the world around us. But just like a mirror, it doesn't hold on to anything. It simply reflects. The challenge arises when we start identifying with our thoughts. We think that because a thought arises, it must be true. We get stuck in the idea that our thoughts define us, and this is where suffering begins. If we believe our negative thoughts, we start to feel like we are failures, unworthy. We're stuck in a cycle of negativity. But Buddhism offers a different perspective. It teaches us that thoughts are not who we are. They are just passing clouds in the sky. Think of your mind like a calm lake. Sometimes, negative thoughts are like stones being thrown into the water, creating ripples. The ripples may disturb the surface of the lake, but they don't change the deep, peaceful waters beneath. In the same way, our thoughts may disturb us, but if we don't attach to them, they will pass. The key is to observe the thoughts without becoming identified with them. One of the first things we learn in Buddhism is that everything is impermanent. This includes our thoughts. Negative thoughts, just like positive ones, come and go. The more we resist them, the stronger they become. But if we learn to accept them without judgment, they begin to lose their power over us. This is where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is the practice of being aware of our thoughts without judging them or reacting to them. It's about observing what's happening in our minds without getting caught up in it. When you have a negative thought, instead of fighting it or trying to push it away, simply acknowledge it. Say to yourself, "This is just a thought. It doesn't define me." By doing this, you create a space between yourself and the thought. The thought is no longer controlling you. You are observing it. Another powerful Buddhist tool for overcoming negative thoughts is the practice of loving kindness, or metta. When negative thoughts arise, especially thoughts of anger or resentment, it's easy to get caught in a cycle of negativity. But metta teaches us to replace those thoughts with love and compassion, not only for others but for ourselves as well. When you experience negative thoughts about yourself, try to replace them with kind and loving thoughts. Say to yourself, "May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be at peace." By practicing metta, you shift your focus from negativity to kindness. This doesn't mean you ignore the negative thoughts. Instead, you transform them into something more constructive. Another concept in Buddhism that helps us deal with negative thoughts is the idea of non-attachment. We are often attached to our thoughts, believing that they are an accurate reflection of reality. But Buddhism teaches us that attachment to thoughts only causes suffering. When we cling to negative thoughts, we get stuck in a loop. We think, "I am unworthy," or "I will never succeed," and those thoughts define our experience. Instead, Buddhism encourages us to practice non-attachment, to let go of the need to hold on to any thought, whether it's positive or negative. When you let go of the attachment to your thoughts, you free yourself from their grip. You begin to see them for what they are, just fleeting mental events that don't hold any inherent truth. In addition to mindfulness, loving kindness, and non-attachment, Buddhist meditation practices are powerful tools for overcoming negative thoughts. Meditation allows us to train the mind to focus, become more aware of our thoughts, and create a sense of inner peace. One of the most common meditation techniques used in Buddhism is anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. When you sit in meditation, focus on your breath. Notice the sensation of the breath as it enters and leaves your body. If negative thoughts arise, simply acknowledge them, and then return your attention to your breath. With practice, this helps you detach from the negative thoughts and create a sense of inner calm. In time, as you develop a regular meditation practice, you'll find that your mind becomes less reactive to negative thoughts. You'll be able to observe them without getting caught up in them. You'll realize that negative thoughts are just like clouds passing through the sky, temporary and insubstantial. And as you let go of your attachment to them, you'll discover the peace that lies beneath the surface of your mind. It's important to remember that overcoming negative thoughts is not an overnight process. It takes time, patience, and practice. But with consistent effort, you'll begin to notice a shift in your mind. You'll become less affected by negative thoughts and more at ease with yourself. And in doing so, you'll experience greater freedom and peace in your life. One of the most liberating things we can do in our spiritual journey is to realize that we are not our thoughts. Thoughts come and go, but we are the awareness that observes them. We are the stillness behind the storm. When we learn to observe our thoughts with mindfulness, compassion, and non-attachment, we create the space for peace to enter our lives. In conclusion, the Buddhist approach to overcoming negative thoughts is a powerful path to mental freedom. It teaches us that negative thoughts are not permanent, that we don't need to identify with them, and that we can transform them through mindfulness, loving kindness, and meditation. By practicing these principles, we begin to break free from the cycle of negativity and cultivate a mind that is peaceful, clear, and liberated. Silencing the inner critic, cultivating compassion. Our minds can be powerful tools. They help us think, create, and plan, but they can also be harsh critics. That inner voice constantly telling us we're not good enough, that we don't measure up, that we're failures. It's a voice that often brings self-doubt, insecurity, and negativity into our lives. This voice is relentless, and it's not easy to ignore. It doesn't matter if we're working on a project, talking to someone, or even just sitting alone. The inner critic can show up anywhere, anytime. It tells us things like, "You can't do this," "You'll never be successful," or no one cares about you. It makes us question ourselves, and in some cases, it can stop us from even trying. But what if I told you that this inner voice isn't your true self? What if I told you that this voice is a learned pattern, a conditioned response that has developed over time? The truth is, this voice is not who you are, and it doesn't define you. It's a story your mind tells, one that often comes from old wounds, fears, and expectations. And the worst part is, we often listen to it and believe it. We start to think that it's true, that we're not enough. But this is where the teachings of Buddhism come in. They offer us a way to silence the inner critic and reconnect with our true, compassionate nature. In Buddhism, one of the core teachings is compassion. Compassion for others, yes, but also compassion for ourselves. We often forget to be kind to ourselves. We're quick to offer understanding and forgiveness to others, but we rarely do the same for ourselves. Instead, we criticize ourselves, we judge ourselves harshly, and we beat ourselves up for making mistakes. But the path to peace starts with self-compassion. To silence the inner critic, we must first learn to be kind to ourselves. Buddhist teachings suggest that we practice loving kindness, metta, towards ourselves. This is the foundation of self-compassion. Loving kindness is the practice of wishing well for yourself and others, of offering goodwill and positive thoughts. It's a simple yet powerful practice that can help quiet the mind's negativity and replace it with warmth and understanding. But how can you do this in your own life? Let me guide you through a simple practice. The next time you hear that critical voice in your head, pause for a moment, take a deep breath and recognize that this voice is not you. It's just a pattern, a habit of thinking that you've learned over time. Now, instead of reacting to it, try to respond with compassion. Imagine that the voice belongs to a friend or a loved one who is going through a tough time. How would you speak to them? Would you tell them they're not good enough? Of course not. You'd encourage them, support them, and remind them of their strengths.